Welcome everyone at the next multi-network community sync. Today we have March 19th. I have one item to discuss, and that's the results and feedback from yesterday's device management meeting work group. I went there and showed the slides I linked here. It's just like CUJ of what we are thinking the multi-network plus DI could work. Our current idea of around this. Any other topics to add, please feel free to add them to the doc. I'm gonna just paste them here in the chat. If anyone wants to add an item. Let me start with this one. So I linked the slides as well. I got them for some time. I don't think I ever showed them here, but it's just straightforward what we discussed and basically the pictures that we have. But I think 2 pointers. Maybe I think the general idea, it wasn't severely rejected or anything like that. There will be a recording of this, so it might be my personal subjective view, but from my opinion, I think it was quite positive. And then I think there were 2 comments that we got. I think the first one was the access to the pod network. How we would control pods accessing a pod network, considering it's an access to a network, right? So what will be the access control for that part? I think this is where they did mention that we are creating the thing out to go directly in the all namespaces, the templates in the automated mode. Because I think I did present it mostly the automated mode because the manual, if you create the template, that's just like straightforward. You just create them where do you want to point to a namespace where you want this to be in. But then for the fully automated mode, where we were to create all the templates in all the namespaces, I think this is where the question was, how is there a way to kind of limit that, right? And now when I think about this, we have the selector for a specific namespaces. We have a namespace selector already. Now when I think about this in our initial, I think in our design based on the discussion last in February, we did here, right, where we have a selector for namespace where we expect the object to be present, right, the one that we want to have. So I think we probably could leverage this in some ways to do this, since we have the label or the selector there, where we would say if you specify all of them. Right now we said this is an OR in this picture. You can have either those two or the namespace selector. So I think an option might be that we could say it's AND, OR, and AND. If you don't specify other options, we expect those to be created by you. But if you specify either one of the config or device class, then we just create and limit things to this namespace selector, right? So we will create over there. I think that's kind of one of the things we could address. And I think we can discuss it more. I just want to maybe not try to solve it right away. I think the other item was I'm gonna write that down. Network. And the other item that was mentioned is, I think, ability to select different implementations for the pod network. So I think this would kind of has bubbling up the question. The question that had bubbled up was, is pod network a logical representation of a network or a straightforward infrastructure, a one-to-one representation of infrastructure? And what's the difference? Is, let's say my pod network is VLAN X. I think this would be a straightforward infrastructure representation. I think, and where was the difference between a logical pod network is, you might say, oh, this is pod network that has a capability X. So, for example, it's a internet network, pod network, right? It's a network that has access to internet. And what are the consequences of this is that the logical network, you might not really care how it is implemented on each of the nodes. I think that's the difference, right? I might say that I have some various ways about my stuff across my cluster. And for example, I'm not sure what will be the reason, but let's say, for example, on one node A, I will do my internet connection via a IP VLAN because I don't know, the underlying infrastructure where that node is connected requires it. I just throwing something. But on the other node, it will go through a MAC VLAN because it's a logical network. We don't care how, at this point, and in this case, we don't care how exactly things are done. We just logically need a representation of a network that does this functionality, right? I think that was a fair kind of point to make. And I would like to hear this group's opinion. What do you think? Is that something that we should worry? That should we support a logical pod network? And I'm just going to throw it one item that we always said pod network is up to the implementation on what it represents, right? We never said, oh, it has to be A or B, right? We always said it has to be generic, and the implementation defines what it really is and how you treat it, right? Is it logical, or is it just a straightforward kind of infrastructure representation? Other thoughts, anyone?
Well, I agree that it should be generic because you're going to obviously have logical and physical representations that need to be sliced. And but I did have a couple of small questions, just trying to catch up. You say pod network here. Unfortunately, that name's already been used to represent the the default networking that happens for interpod communications. is
Mm.
But it sounds like it's not necessarily that. Not if it's the an internet bound network. So what? I guess
So
one question with relation to that is. We already have a default configured network, right, for the pod network. Is this an extra, or are we going to have some way to identify down to the CRI with the one that needs to be, held inviolate for the initial pod?
So we would like to have it both ways, because depending on what the cluster needs.
Right.
If you don't want to go full in, like all in into multi-networking, you would want this to be an additional things and keep it simple and just that. But there may be some clusters where they want to all in. So there will be, and in my doc, if you want to read, I think there's the initial draft here. I am calling out something called default pod network, which is what you just described, which is the default network that is current today. But it is represented through this as well. That's the point, right? So this is the more all in, we're going all in. This is the whole networking is done through pod network, and even the default network is represented through this. And the difference between the two approaches is that I can then have a pod that connects just to a network B. There is no default network in that pod, right? That's the point, right? So basically, a full-fledged from kind of public clouds VPC approach, right? Where basically, and that's another thing where you would want to have all the pod networks equal. What you said, like today, default pod network has internet access, right? That shouldn't block the other networks to have the same. And additionally, another aspect, let's say Kube API
Which
access.
one's going to have the loopback network? Which is the minimum requirement, right?
but that's inside the pod and always the one that's there. But inside inside the host, it's up to how you implement this, right? That's so because you might not. That's the thing, right? Okay, so and I think this is where it boils down to, right? Did I answer that question,
I'll check.
Mike?
I'll check your document. I didn't see it in the
Sure. Okay,
chart.
thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was.
So and getting back to exactly that, the logical access to the internet is just one of the examples, right? It doesn't have to be that. It can be something feature X or some other logical whatever you can think of, right?
Sure.
And I think where it boils down to, I think John, what he brought up was how would I then represent that, right, through this? Because in DRA, if you have direct DRA access, you can create those selectors and use all the additional features or list even items where you would say, okay, this thing can use A, B, or C driver, right? And basically, I don't care which driver is enabled on which node. All of them consist and create my logical network. So I don't really care in terms of, okay, here it's a IP VLAN, there MAC VLAN, or yet another place it's a VXLAN or what's not. I'm just throwing crazy things, but the point is the underlying implementation, it doesn't matter across the nodes. It's the logical, the whole thing is constructed to a logical level and it serves my purpose, right? And then of course, having those different implementation under the hood, you need to kind of live with that and kind of define what does that mean, right? Then your implementation should properly kind of handle that, or your multiple different drivers. But I think this is the kind of point he was making. Are we allowing that, or is that because this is one of the capabilities of DRA, right? I can pick and choose any drivers, and I don't care what sort of stuff is on what node. I just want to have a grouped or selected abilities to say, okay, this thing can be any of those 5 ABCs, right, or 3 ABCs, right, and then whichever node supports whichever, then do use that, right, whatever available on a specific node. So I think that was his goal and how we would represent that one, right? So folks, any feedback to that? And what do you think on this? I might be having some. No comments. I think should we pursue that, because I think one of the kind of what we talked with John, and that was just like few minutes, is could the class take over that burden, right? And can we overload the device class where the implementation can say, okay, you can have this logical network can be constructed of such class, right? And maybe, but he wasn't fully sure is would that work? But that's kind of one of, at least I would. This is something that I was kind of proposing. Maybe that can be the getaway for this and ways to solve this, because the class would be presented and defined by the implementation, right? And provided by implementation, and then it can hold all those various kind of ways on what can be selected in difference to what we're currently proposing in the automated mode, where it's very opinionated on how the default template is going to get created in automated way, right? Or lastly, what we can say is you want to do the logical, you can go with the manually pre-created resource class template. That's a solution as well, right? So that's an answer for this, where if you want to have this more sophisticated way where your pod network consists of multiple drivers across the board, then you can just create your own template specifying that and then just point that with your pod network, because we support such approach. And yeah, I think then that solves that. Any comments? Hmm.
I just going through the docs, it seems like you could use a couple of use cases.
So the use cases are defined in the previous caps. I didn't add them because that's something that is I probably just need to copy paste them. I agree with you to kind of properly do that. But I think there's something that we defined back in. That's why I didn't add it there. But I agree, I can copy paste them there and so that it's in one space. All right, I think this is any other kind of on the logical any comments on the logical pod network?
What type of resources would you be claiming in a logical network as opposed to a physical network that has actual resources?
I think no, it's not that. Keep in mind, you would still claim a resource. The difference being, I can across the cluster, I can claim various ones. That's the point, right? Because keep in mind, node A might have only driver A, node B can have only driver B, right? And I want to have my logical network to do, okay, connectivity to X. And basically it can be achieved through both drivers. So I just create a pod network, connectivity to X, and then say you can use either driver A or driver B. I think that's the point, right? Rather than this has to be some special resource. But to be honest with you, that doesn't preclude the implementation to implement it that way that you called out, right?
Okay. So it's an on or off capability on a particular node.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Because I think this is the ability to select multiple drivers, which currently in the automated way, we are opinionated on that you cannot do that because we just select one and that's it, right? One class, one class and one kind of config, and that's it from the pod network level, right? There are of course the classes that you can expand it a bit, but I think that's the point here, that having the ability to select multiple drivers, I think this is where it boils down to. All right. Any other comments on the logical? if not, we can kind of talk about a bit about the ACL. I need to talk as well with John on anyone, unless anyone has some idea on what is the kind of access control for DRA today. I think it's all namespace, but I'm not sure whether they have some sort of additional control over that. I think my concern with the namespace control, if we were to say here, right, and we were to just say, okay, those are only the namespaces that I allow you to support, right? So I'm creating those guys. What will happen, or how we would block situation where I have a namespace, where are you here? I have namespace X and someone just created a, or maybe namespace hack, and someone created a resource template foo as well, right? So how will we block that this foo isn't part of the pod network, right? Because that can happen, right? And how do we say that this hack namespace is not part of the selectors, right? Because we have these selectors pointing to those two guys, right? But then someone just has a new namespace and created the resource claim template foo, right? Since we are leveraging only the same name across the board, and then someone creates a let's say creates a service or namespace for against this pod network to this, right? Will that still work? Or even stepping back, even if they were just look up what this guy looked like, copy paste it into their own namespace, and basically having the same control. I think this is the same for DRA if you think about this, and I assume this would have to be controlled through a RBAC to the whole object anyway. Is that the right thinking here? Is that then the control? That a hack has no permissions to create the resource claim template? I think that then can be the kind of answer for my question, right? Because this is what I'm saying can happen as well for the for just not only pod network, but as well for just other resource claim templates. So I wonder whether there is some additional mechanism for that kind of case, right? Where, okay, I can create resource claim templates, so I can create my own namespace, do that. Or in my own namespace, I can create a similar claim template and just use those resources. So I wonder whether it just boils down to having a specific namespace, having the power to create the claim object. I think that's one way to think about this.
I think there's plans to have access control in DRA, but there's nothing implemented so far. I don't know if this is part of it, but from what I understood so far, it was just at some point it would be some access to say this pod could claim or not this kind of resources or these specific resources, but I don't really know about the status of this feature.
Okay, so I think if that would be the case, then we would push it on the, no, we cannot push this on implementation fully. Okay, that's something that we will have to think then as well.
I think, yes, this will have to be part of the DRA's API design itself. And in my limited reading of DRA, I'm just beginning, but I also didn't find any kind of restrictions which prevent such kind of things. Like you said, I think the only access control that they have is for namespaces. And if we are going beyond a namespace with a cluster scope resource, then this is net new, I guess. So we are the first movers. We have to.
So the pod network will be, we can control that globally, right? That's fine. I think the problem is the other namespace. Your control, your account cannot just create this object for in that namespace, right? That's it, I think. Yeah. All right. I think that might be so. what are the thoughts about changing this? Because this is somehow what I want to say, inferred behavior, right? It's not kind of explicit here. Because what I mean by that, if I don't specify those two fields, device class and config, I expect you create the objects, right? But if you specify any of those, I will auto create them. Is that somehow kind of a hidden behavior? And is that kind of not very obvious behavior that could be there? Or is that something that we think it's okay? I think what I'm referring to is having this to here and to put an end here, and if that the whole thing can is this end or an end okay? I'm not sure everyone sees this, but to maybe better represent this, maybe what I'm going to do is copy the picture and do something more. Let me just do this. And do this. Oh no. No. Oh, what the heck? Oh, okay. I see what I need to do. I need to do this. Okay, so what I mean by that is I can have, let's say this L1, V1, let's say this is the case. I want to do here, and this is not here. Let me quickly draw this. This. So let's keep this as full and let's make this bar. Let's make this different highlights so that we differentiate. So this one will have such fields, and let's say this is L2 and V2, or maybe we can go because this is just a matter of namespace, right? So so we have these two cases where we do this. One has only namespace selector, the other will have namespace selector plus additional configs. And what that means is this is some NS1. Let's make this NS2. And those two guys have the L1 V1 label. Right. Let me get rid of this. And maybe I can do that. And then this is bar. This is bar. But the difference being is that, let me see how to create it. This guy, this guy, and then user created. Nope. Is that kind of clear now? Any thoughts on this? So basically, this guy just selected has a namespace selector, and what it means is expecting this to be present, right? They has to be in this namespaces. Those two objects has to be there, right? And then we have another bar, which defined other stuff with the selector. That means is I'm gonna auto create those two, right? But I'm afraid this will be kind of confusing.
On the bar, did you mean to say that device class name is unset?
No. It has some values here. No. Sorry. No. It has some values here. I just quickly some values here, right?
This is your and example then, right?
Yes, exactly. So basically, that means that that the bottom ones are auto-created, right, by us only on those two namespaces. So I select with this, I can limit which namespaces I expect this to be present on. So not all, but only on those. If I don't specify this, I create in all, of course, same way. But if it's specified, I limit only to these two namespaces with the label. And then if I don't specify the device class or config, I expect those to be already present. So I expect the user to create those.
You know, once you go that route, you can't do the or anymore, right?
That's fair point. Yes. No. What do you mean?
Well, once you've put one device class name in two namespaces, you can no longer use the or operation as a way to filter between the namespaces.
But those are two separate pod networks. Why would I care? Because those two different names, foo and bar, right? So I think those are separate. Those are like separate things, right? Those are two separate pod networks, right? That I created, right? One, and how I can create, and it's in a different ways. I'm kind of missing your point, Mike.
Well, yeah, it means that you can no longer have a default namespace, and that device class name, all right, is only allocated in another namespace, right? So the your bar is now available, must be available in all namespaces, essentially.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Because I can have another. What if I have another bar claim in different namespace?
Yes.
What does that mean, right? Oh, that's a fair point. Because this refers only to those, but
I think,
yes,
yeah, it sounded sort of like you wanted a bar prime if you're using namespaces to isolate, but you wanted to provide the same capability in both.
So I think in terms between those two namespaces, that is fine. I think more, but what you brought up is a valid case about maybe not the hack case, but even let's say just normal case where okay, what if just other namespace has the ability to create a resource claim, and they are just going to name it same way, right? What does that mean? I think this is something that we need to define, right? What if I have this guy here creating another thing named and this is without a label, right? It doesn't match, so it's NS free. And this one names bar, or even going to the previous case, let's say this calls it foo. But the problem is this should be green for us because it should be different foo than this foo, and it doesn't match. That situation can happen, and what's then, right? I think this is something that we need to kind of define on how I differentiate between our claim templates versus someone else's, right? Because yeah, this can happen, right? And let's say this will have completely different configuration. It will point to GPUs or other resources, and it's completely unrelated to multi-network, but the name happens to be the same, right? Do we do something about that, or I wonder if that's something that we need to experiment on as well, is see in this case, this is not hacking. This is, let's say, this is just someone just accidentally or basically they like the full name and just named it as such. What does that mean for us? Does that break us in any ways, right? I think that's the question here, because that's a valid point. This is a question mark for this. Let me just put it here. Because that's something that we need to see of what does this mean really on case where okay, we have such situations. So what does that mean? What are the consequences of this, right?
Mashain, I don't know. I mean, this maybe should be brought to the array and device management. If one would compare it with PVCs, then in the persistent volume, which is a comparison to resource claim, not the template, they have a claim reference where they specify a namespace to make sure that other PVCs cannot bind to it from other namespaces.
So we do have that. Okay, but yeah, keep going.
Yeah, at least for storage. So one could at least bring the subject to the array to make sure how the resource class together with the resource claim could eventually give this potential possibility where the resource claim templates later on can be namespace scoped, etc.
So I think I'm not concerned much about this because, as I mentioned, this is not a hacking scenario. This is just a accidental scenario where the name is just the same, because this resource claim is pointing to a legal for this resource. This is namespace class, and it's completely different class than what these two guys using, right? So I think that's my concern, right? Where the name is just the same. Is there any consequence? I'm just throwing that in to see. I think we need to kind of play around with this. If there is any consequence of having a resource claim template named the same, right? And then you're going to have a pod in that namespace that is going to have the same name. And the question here would be, does that make any consequences in the future? Let's say for service selection, right? I think hopefully not, unless the full template. No, because services, even serviceability is namespace. So I think it shouldn't matter. I think at least on that aspect, on serviceability, network policies are namespaced as well. So there is that. But I think if you were thinking about, I wonder, anyone knows admin network policies, are those cluster scoped or namespaced? Those probably are cluster scoped, right? And this is where probably we might get kind of bumped if we were to align the admin network namespace, and that's cluster wide, and it is then applying. Let's apply this to a network foo. Will that apply to those pods that reference this, right? Because then we have to make sure we only applying it to the correct pods, right? Not the ones that accidentally have the same name in the template. Okay, so this is one, I think, place where this might get tricky. Okay. Any other comments to this? Anyone has some ideas? Or maybe the feel about like between those two types of pod networks. Is that somehow valid, or this is too kind of convoluted and might be confusing for the user? And we should rather have a new field called, I don't know, allowed namespaces selector. Yet another selector, yet another field that will say that, instead of reusing a field, and it might have kind of two functions, and depending on what other fields do. I think that's where it boils down to, right? Or maybe this, or having allowed namespace selector. should this be like this, right? It's a separate field which is explicit. These are used the same way they were. So this is either device classes or this. So that doesn't change. And we just add another field, allowed namespace selector. And basically this guy cannot be used with the namespace selector. It's kind of, they are exclusive. But then we have a clear field that says, okay, those are, this is a selectors for allowed namespaces.
What's the difference? Not quite following the difference between the allowed, because that seemed like that's what they were indicating. Here's a set of namespaces where you're going to find
Fair point.
this pod network.
I think it's depending on whether of the presence of those two fields, right? Depends on because behavior depends on the presence of any of those two fields, right? It changes slightly, right? Maybe not. Maybe you're right. It's just a presence of those two fields indicate whether I auto create them or you have to define them, right? I think you're right. But otherwise, I still select the namespace where I expect things to be, right? And allow only those namespaces.
I guess in my head, when you're specifying a device class name, right, it's saying, okay, we're only going to be worried about a default namespace, right? Not, one of these other namespaces that it could also be located in, right? This particular pod network.
So I think on the default pod network, that one definitely would have no selectors, right? Because default has to be available across whole clusters. So there is definitely default pod network would never have any of these. It has to be available in every namespace. So it has to always be there. And there is that aspect. But for these, here, I think that's fine. I think what you're saying is you're right. It serves the same purpose. I'm limiting this pod network to those namespaces, and whether you specify the device class names and config, it just indicates whether I auto create them for you or you have to define them. Yeah.
Yeah. Basically, you can't have the same pod network in two namespaces if you put a list in there. Otherwise, this device class name is being made available, right, until it's been claimed. Unless it's set to unset. If they're both unset, then the default would be anybody can use it. Anybody can claim it, right?
I'm confused on the last. What do you mean?
Reading through the instructions, right? It says here that you may use it to restrict, right? Only installing classes with the selectors for permitted devices. If users are free to request anything, then the implementations can create an empty device class. An unset device class. It's like a filter.
That's fair. But it boils down to DRA now, right? Because that's from our point of view, you have to point to it, right? So from what's inside the class, and as you said, can be empty. But then it's up to the kind of implementation on. We expect the implementation to provide the class. By the way, there is that aspect, right?
Right.
We are not specifying. So the provider that provides you the classes, and they can be empty. They can be just one, whatever, right?
But you have to have so if they allow all to access the same, right, the same claim, it would just be set this to unset, and then and support it, not throw out the claim, right?
Fair.
Right, but then if you want to filter, the way I'm reading these two fields from a DRA perspective is that you would say, okay, well, you can only have one in these particular namespaces. Filtering mechanism, right?
Okay, that's fair. So maybe this can as well then, from what you're saying, this probably can be as well applied to the previous issue, like the kind of logical pod network where the filtering can then be multiple things, right, in a class.
Right. Yeah. Because it's logical. Why not? You can assign it to anybody.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not isolated to a particular namespace.
Yeah.
It'd be the default implementation for most logical networks.
Yeah. All right.
Not using any physical resources. It's not restricted to any right?
Yeah. All right. I think I can make that change in the design. If nobody objects, then I can tweak that to kind of indicate, and we will have since we have the field already, we talked it for the other thing, but I can adjust the text there to say that, yeah, you can have both. And what does that mean then? That you limit only to the specific namespace. All right. Any other topics anyone wants to bring up?
You guys ready for KubeCon EU?
Yeah, I'm not I'm not gonna be there, unfortunately. I'm not sure other folks. I think, is it next week or 2 weeks?
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
2 weeks. So we still have next week, right, folks, to meet, and I think in 2 weeks we're gonna take a week off. But yeah, Lionel, you wanted to say something? Go ahead.
No, just wanted to ask if there was any conclusion at the end for this logical pod network or not, because I feel this is related to this namespace selector, or the naming of the pod network and the resource plane.
So I think the logical aspect is only configuration and how far we can push the class, or just push it on the manually created resource claim templates. I think this piece is always a solution for us, right? If you want to achieve the logical way and your class is unable to satisfy that, you can always create your own template that would do that, right? So I think what I'm trying to get to is it is possible to support both. So we don't have to say, oh, no, you can only do infrastructure or logical. I think with what we are saying here today, you can do both regardless, right? I think we are there. Don't you think, Lionel, or you think we should restrict it somehow?
No, my question was more about, or what I had in mind was that you can have two resource claim templates that defines the same pod network. So if we restrict on having the same name, the pod network name and the resource claim template name, then this is not possible, right?
Why not? What am I missing?
I mean, we cannot have two resource claim templates with the same name, right?
No, that's fair. But inside that template, you would define multiple drivers that this template can leverage. I think that's the point. And then across your nodes, you might have one node doing driver A, the other node doing driver B. But then resource claim template can match both, can select both. That's the point. Which, in the automated way, you cannot do that, right? Because we always we provide only one item, right?
If you have to request in your resource claim templates, you will get two devices. I mean, you should request two devices, right?
So I think it's all about, and this is maybe I'm a bit hand waving. I'm not the DRA specialist. I think the goal here is, I want to request just one resource, but this one resource can be either A or B, right? And because across the nodes, I can have nodes that has only A, and I have some nodes that have only B. But I still want to make sure this logical network, in this case, in our case, is available across all the nodes. I think that's the point.
Well,
you see that?
I don't think. Yeah, I understand. Just I don't think you can do that with DRA now.
That was my impression from John when he was saying that yesterday. Unless I'm missing that. That was his kind of point. Okay, that's a fair point. Let me follow up on this. Let me sync with him as well, because I think that at least that's how I understood it. The recording will be available probably next week, so you can all watch it again and see whether I missed something maybe. But I think that was his. But when you think about this, I think logically as well, you want to be able to select any, let's say, GPU, right, across the board, because I think this is where it's coming from. where, or even our virtual functions, right? I can have a vendor A, a Broadcom on one node, and then Mellanox on the other, and then Intel on yet another. What I care about, I want to have a physical virtual function, right? My nodes is mix and match of all those vendors. I don't want to specify separate resource claims for each. I want to say, I need this pod requires a need virtual function.
Okay.
And
I see.
And basically what I'm saying is, and maybe how you select it, maybe I'm hand waving on how you do that. Maybe it's not done through multiple drivers, or I don't know, or maybe through the cell capabilities. I don't know, but I want to say this workload needs a virtual function. And across the multi-nodes, it's implemented through various vendors, each having their own driver. But then I should be able to just, with one definition, be able to select any of those.
Right. Yeah. This is okay. This is possible. Yes.
Okay, there you go. So I think that's the point. And how you do it, maybe I described it wrong. Sorry, but on how exactly do that. But I think that's the point that John was making, that I should be able to select any driver for underlying infrastructure, right? And my example was maybe not on the spot, because virtual, you should be able to, until you have a proper kernel across the nodes, you should be do any virtual stuff, if it's, especially when it's Linux, right? So I don't know why would you want to do it, like Mac VLAN here, IP VLAN there. That's kind of sounds strange, but I think the better case is virtual functions here with the various vendors. But I think that's what his point was, right? That are you able to do that, right, for this? So I think what I'm saying is you can stretch the classes to select you various things. I think, I'm not sure. But if not, then you can always create your manual template and you achieve the same thing, right? Because then a DRA is at full, you have control over DRA at full, and you can just do that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I don't, because it's possible that you claim a device, any kind of device, I don't know, Intel GPU or NVIDIA GPU, but if you want to pass the config and there's two different drivers, the config will probably not be the same. So I don't really know how this would work. I mean, if it's two different drivers, they will accept different API for the config, and yeah, I don't really.
So this is where once you define, you still can define multiple configs, right? Because it's a list. In our automated ways, it's always one. And I'm not saying that can cover this. But I'm saying with the manually created template, you probably could. I'm not sure. That's a question mark from me.
Yeah, you can have multiple config for the same request.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think this is where he was pointing out that DRA-ness. That's the kind of the full DRA capability that I am obscuring with what I've showed as a pod network, and basically that's why he pointed out how would you do that, right? Because that's one of the DRA features, right?
Okay. Yeah, in my mind, yeah, it was more having multiple resource claim templates for the same pod network.
Fair. All right. Any other comments?
Another question. Yesterday they was mentioning this something in NVIDIA they are doing similar to this pod network. Have you looked into this? Or
I have not, but I assume it's okay. So what he mentioned, I think, is they defined a maybe simplified way on how to select various GPUs, NVIDIA GPUs, and then how to align them and what's not. So I think because there must be logic, and they just want to hide that logic. That's my impression of what NVIDIA wants to try to do. I'm not sure how much any of you is aware of the GPU and plus networking. There is some sort of alignments that has to happen. From what I am very limited ways, but somehow aware. And this is all about like performance for those leverage of the GPU plus networking, where you have to align some of the things. And basically what it means is they created, I think, an object saying like we are doing for their purpose to kind of simplify that complexity.
Yeah, it would be nice to see what is the project and to see how it is going, just to compare and maybe get some inspiration maybe.
That's a fair point. Yeah, I have not read into that now yet. All right. Oh, you've been there, Lionel, yesterday then.
Yeah, I was listening.
All right. So you're not speaking up. That wasn't. So what do you think? What's your impression? Was that positive feedback or not?
Yeah, I think so. I don't really have so much comments. I think it was the normal path to go from what I understood from John. Yeah, I don't have so much comment, I would say.
Okay. All right, folks, we are at the time. Let's meet next week. And that's going to be the last one probably before KubeCon. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.